You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight you will hear them. Whispers coiled through the iron veins of the building, not the usual gurgle and sigh of water, nor the arthritic groans of settling timbers. Ancient edifices like the sovereign arms hummed with a symphony of age. No, these were different. Fragments of speech, indistinct murmurs, leaking from the very plaster of apartment 4B. My task was simple. Quell a bathroom leak, another skirmish in the endless war against decay in this 1922 relic. 8 years I'd served as its caretaker, intimately familiar with every protesting floorboard, every rust-choked conduit. Yet this phantom colloquy was utterly novel. The apartment's occupant, Ms. Adler, was absent, having entrusted me with a key and a request to secure the premises upon completion. Drawn by the susurrus, I pressed an ear flat against the cool bathroom tile. Closer now, the cadence resolved into two voices, masculine and feminine, though their specific utterances remained frustratingly veiled. A tentative rap of my knuckles against the wall. Silence, abrupt and total. Anyone there? My voice sounded thin in the tiled chamber. Emptiness answered. My phone displayed the building's schematics, brittle lines on a glowing screen. Between 4B and its neighbor, 4A, the blueprint depicted only solid partition, but such documents were often unreliable testaments to a structure this old, riddled with undocumented surgeries, sealed portals, bricked up fenestration, entire chambers swallowed by subsequent renovations. I'd unearthed forgotten histories before. Retrieving my heavier tools felt necessary. The grout around the tiles was already surrendering to time. Investigating potential moisture ingress behind them seemed prudent. 4 tiles yielded, then my hammer struck a curious void, punching through plaster into hollow darkness. Gingerly, I enlarged the aperture. Beyond the crumbling lath lay a cramped interstice, perhaps 2 feet across. My flashlight beam sliced through stagnant air, illuminating skeins of cobweb, drifts of settled decades, and deeper within, anomalous silhouettes. I chipped away more tile, creating an opening just wide enough for passage. The space confined, breathing shallow in the dust-laden atmosphere. My light snagged on metal glimmering on the floorboards, an antique tin, shoebox-sized. Beside it rested a leather satchel, its surface cracked, rigid with desiccation. The voices had utterly ceased. Only my own respiration and the gritty crunch of debris underfoot disturbed the quiet. The tin resisted, its lid fused by rust, but yielded to the persuasion of my screwdriver. Inside, currency, stacks of bills bearing the grand portraits of a bygone era, bound by rubber bands that disintegrated at my touch. Thousands, easily. The satchel disgorged a tangle of jewelry, necklaces, rings, timepieces, all gold, dulled by tarnish, yet undeniably precious. Beneath this trove lay a small notebook, its pages brittle, jaundiced by time. I directed my beam onto the first leaf. The ink, though faded, remained legible. June 15th, 1947. Drop made near midnight. Nico says lay low. Too much attention after the Harrison snatch. Haul's good, best yet. 3 ways, 12 grand each. Fair pay for a night. Cops clueless. Papers call it a burglary spree, fools. Stick to the plan. Keep quiet. We're set. A tremor started in my hands as I navigated the fragile pages. A meticulous ledger of transgressions spanning nearly 2 years. Jewelers, private residences, even a bank heist. Names, dates, tallies of stolen wealth. The final entry bore the date April 1949. Something's off. Nico missed check-in 3 days now. Lena saw blues watching his place. Think someone squealed. Gotta move the stash now. Come back when it blows over. They never returned. 75 years this horde had waited within the wall. Footsteps sounded in the outer apartment. Ms. Adler, returning prematurely. Hastily, I returned the box and bag to their niche, clumsily replacing the tiles. A proper repair would require more finesse, more time. Mr. Thorne, still working? Ms. Adler's voice echoed from the living area. Just about done, I called back, a betraying crackle in my tone. Had to open the wall slightly, check the pipes inside. Bit of water damage. I'll need to return tomorrow to patch it properly. Oh dear, anything serious? Standard for these old systems. Nothing alarming. Gathering my implements, I fought to steady my hands. First thing tomorrow, I'll bring the right materials. The drive home was a blur, thoughts racing, colliding. $50,000, maybe more, secreted away. Legally, it belonged somewhere else. The building's owner, perhaps the authorities. Stolen goods. But after 3/4 of a century, who would pursue it? Statutes of limitation surely rendered it inert history. Sleep offered little refuge, haunted by those disembodied voices. Auditory illusion, tricks of ancient architecture. Yet they felt undeniably real. Articulate conversations bleeding through. What? Solid wall, according to the plans. By 7 the next morning, I stood again at the Sovereign Arms. Ms. Adler, clad in her bathrobe, admitted me. My goodness, Mr. Thorne, you weren't exaggerating about an early start, she remarked. Best to address moisture promptly. It only worsens with time. I waited until the sound of the front door closing signaled her departure for her morning constitutional, then made straight for the bathroom. The replaced tiles stood out, starkly new. They'd need artificial aging. But first, confirmation. Another look into that secret cavity. The moment I began dislodging tiles, the voices resumed, sharper this time, chillingly distinct. They'll find us. They always find us. Quiet. Nobody's looking. Too long gone. I froze, chisel poised. The sound emanated from within. The hidden gap. Impossible. I'd explored it yesterday. Barely room for one man to stand, let alone converse. More tiles fell away. The opening widened, my flashlight beam plunging into the dusty pocket. Box and bag sat undisturbed. But now, footprints marred the thick dust. Fresh prints, leading deeper into the wall. An impossibility. The space terminated mere feet back. I'd scanned every inch. Yet the prints were undeniable, and distinctly not mine. Prudence screamed, "Seal the wall! Report nothing! Flee! Call the owner! Call the police! Do anything but the action I took next." Squeezing through the opening once more, I followed the impossible trail. It led to what appeared to be the solid rear boundary of the alcove. But under pressure from my hand, it yielded. A hidden panel, masterfully concealed. The voices intensified. "Someone's here. Hide it, quick." I shoved the panel. It grated open, protesting with the shriek of long dormant rusted hinges. Utter darkness lay beyond. My flashlight swept across a newly revealed chamber, roughly 12 feet square. Bare brick walls, concrete floor. Not empty. 2 figures occupied a far corner. A man and a woman, draped in the fashions of the 1940s, coated in a fine patina of dust. Their faces were sunken grayish voids where eyes should be. They regarded me with unnerving stillness. Recoiling, I struck my head against the low ceiling. The beam of my flashlight passed through them, encountering only the brick behind. They weren't solid. Couldn't be. "You shouldn't have found this," the woman whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Nobody should," the man echoed. "We saw to that. I'm just the maintenance," I stammered, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. "Liar!" the woman hissed, the sound sharp, venomous. "You came for the cash. They always come back for the cash." "How many?" The question escaped before I could stop it, dreading the answer. "How many others found this?" The man offered a smile, revealing teeth unnaturally white, unnervingly sharp. "Sufficient. The avaricious ones always sniff it out, but they don't sniff their way back." I bolted, dropped the flashlight, slammed shoulders against the narrow passage walls, scraped flesh raw on rough masonry. Behind me, their laughter pursued, no longer muffled, but crystalline, glacial. I erupted from the wall cavity into the mundane reality of Ms. Adler's bathroom, trailing filaments of dust and ancient webs. Didn't cease my flight until I was behind the wheel of my truck, engine roaring, hands trembling too violently to engage the gear shift. From the parking lot, I phoned the building owner, spoke of significant water damage, potential structural compromise, the necessity of opening the entire wall. "Get estimates from contractors," he replied absently. "Address it next month, budget allowing." I tendered my resignation that afternoon, found employment across the city, tending to newer constructions, buildings with reliable blueprints and walls that behaved predictably, structures where the only whispers in the pipes were steam and flow. Yet sometimes, in the deep quiet of night, the voices return, not through plaster or iron, but within the confines of my own skull. I ponder the others, the ones who discovered that room, the greedy ones, the ones who didn't run. Dreams sometimes conjure the notebook. I wonder if subsequent entries exist, penned after 1949. A new ledger, names and dates of all who breached the hidden space, seduced by its treasure. All who succumbed to avarice. All who never emerged. The sovereign arm still stands, its antiquated plumbing persisting, failing, demanding attention. Occasionally, my route takes me past. I glance up at the fourth-floor windows at 4B. Sometimes, indistinct shapes seem to drift behind the glass. Sometimes, they seem to acknowledge me with a wave. I never reciprocate. Telling someone, the authorities, the owner, the local historical society, crosses my mind. But credibility is fragile. And what fate awaits the hapless worker sent to corroborate such a tale? Better, perhaps, to let secrets remain buried. Let the whispers stay contained. Let the dust guard its chronicle. But should you ever find yourself working within the bones of an old place, and you perceive voices where none should be, heed this counsel. Repair what demands mending. Patch the breaches, but disturb nothing extraneous. Some voids are meant to remain inviolate. Some treasures are best left unfound. And if fortune or misfortune leads you to discover something, currency, jewels, cryptic journals, replace it precisely, seal the opening, depart. The voices might beckon, might unveil illusions, might promise untold wealth. Resist their siren call. Avert your gaze. Refuse their offerings. Because the truth about hidden spaces is stark, they are concealed for potent reasons. And sometimes those reasons linger, still observing, still awaiting the arrival of the covetous. I was fortunate. I fled. But those voices, those shadowed figures, they possess infinite patience. They have nothing but time. And inevitably, another will hear the whispers through the walls. Another will yield to curiosity. Another will succumb to greed. And perhaps that next soul will not possess the necessary speed to escape. That immense wooden door. I recall the day my palm first pressed against its ancient grain. Late afternoon light, the kind that bleeds gold and stretches shadows long, caught the cathedral's cracked facade, rendering its weathered stone almost tragic. My entire life, I'd passed this sentinel of faith, its portals invariably chained, its windows sightless voids. But on that particular day, a sliver of invitation. The front gate stood ajar. A strange current quickened in my veins. Piety ran deep in me, always had, and the pull from within, a silent summons, was undeniable. Thought surrendered to impulse. I pushed. Groaning, the hinges yielded. Questions swarmed my mind like agitated bees, yet my feet carried me forward. The threshold crossed. A sepulchral chill clasped me, the air thick with stillness and stale time. Neglect was sovereign here. Dust lay like funerary shrouds upon the pews, some splintered and ravaged by rot. On the walls, weeping patches of darkness showed where plaster had surrendered its painted skin. A faint perfume, the ghosts of burnt wax and evaporated incense, clung to the air, seeding a peculiar disquiet within me. I drew the door closed behind me. The sound echoed, a lonely percussion bouncing off emptiness. My breath hitched, shallowing against the sudden cage of my ribs, my heart hammering a nervous rhythm. Once a house of reverence, it now felt like a forgotten vault, where shadows bred in every recess. Hesitantly, I advanced, each footfall a betrayal of the silence, my soul scuffing against loose flagstones. A pause, and then a sound so faint it might have been imagined. A susurrus, thin as spider silk, that seemed to shape itself into Latin. My grasp of the old tongue is fragmentary, gleaned from years of mass. but these whispers offered no coherence. They felt leagues away, yet simultaneously coiled somewhere between the far-off rafters and the shell of my own ear. My gaze swept the cavernous nave, searching for a source. Nothing. Only derelict grandeur. The echo dissolved, leaving me adrift in uncertainty. The wind, I assured myself. It must have been the wind. My eyes found a smaller side door, promising passage into a narrow, shadowed corridor. Here, the gloom deepened, punctuated only by the fractured remnants of light fixtures overhead. Along the walls hung religious portraits, their gilt frames chipped, their holy visages obscured by decades of grime. My own footsteps sounded unnervingly loud, amplified in the constricted space. I squinted, trying to discern the features in the paintings, but the darkness held them captive. I pressed on, the corridor terminating in what appeared to be a side chapel, or perhaps an ossuary of forgotten prayers, dominated by several skeletal wooden confessionals lined against one wall. Their doors hung askew, broken hinges groaning at my proximity. Their air grew heavier, musty, with the scent of decay, the wood sighing under stresses I hadn't caused. A clammy dampness bloomed on my skin. A tremor ran through me, defying the warmth of my jacket. Curiosity, overcoming caution, I peered into one confessional box. The penitent's seat gaped, its fabric torn. Stained, brittle papers lay scattered on the narrow shelf. Time had bleached most of the ink, rendering the script illegible. Yet, fragments leaped out. Familiar Latin invocations. Domine, miserere. An unexpected dread tightened its grip, the feeling of trespassing upon secrets not meant for mortal eyes. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for a small sheaf of notes tucked behind the splintered kneeler. I unfolded them. Scrawled lines described apparitions near the altar, a figure bathed in inexplicable light. Mentions of sudden flashes, ethereal chanting, footsteps echoing in emptiness. One entry bore a date from decades past, penned in a shaky, desperate hand. Another spoke of voices murmuring in the dark, voices that cataloged personal sins. My mouth turned to dust, a powerful urge to replace the notes, to flee, warred with a morbid magnetism that held me fast. I read on. Recurring themes emerged, a presence within these walls that perceived confessions, yet unspoken. One anonymous writer claimed to have heard their own hidden transgressions whispered down the desolate aisles. Another described the phantom brush of something against their shoulder during prayer. My stomach clenched, nerves singing a high, thin wire of alarm. My faith was a solid thing, built on scripture and ritual. But this felt aberrant. Not the sacred hush of holiness, but something invasive, charged with an energy I couldn't name. Carefully, I refolded the fragile papers, placing them precisely where I'd found them. Taking them felt like theft, like inviting retribution from whatever resided here. Deeper I ventured, crossing the nave once more. I tried for stealth, but the uneven stones betrayed me, each scrape and stumble ricocheting through the vast silence. And then, the whispers returned. Faint, yes, but undeniable now, seeming to emanate from the very fabric of the stone around me. I froze, held my breath, straining to listen. A pause in the sibilant murmur, and then my own name, breathed softly, intimately. A cold fist clenched around my spine. Sweat prickled my brow. Hearing my name uttered in this forsaken place felt like a violation. Is anyone there? My voice, too loud, cracked with tension. Are you trying to frighten me? Silence answered, swallowing my challenge whole. I scanned the rows of pews, searching for any flicker of movement. A few benches creaked softly, protesting the passage of time. Or perhaps something else. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dropping behind a pew, I sought refuge, steadying my ragged breath, peering through the gaps between the seats. Only dust and shadows populated the view. Rising, a jolt shot through my chest as the few remaining overhead lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the cathedral into near total darkness, save for the weak, spectral light filtering through the high, stained glass windows. The soft Latin chanting resurfaced, weaving through the gloom. I forced myself onward, drawn down the central aisle towards the altar. It stood shrouded in dust, its once white cloth a dingy gray canvas of neglect. Tall candle holders listed at precarious angles. The silence here felt different, pressurized, expectant. Reaching out, I brushed the altar's surface. A film of grime clung to my fingertips. The stone beneath was cold, ancient, unforgiving. Then the whispers surged, louder now, still Latin, but interwoven with clarity. My name again, threaded with words like confessa, penitentium, confess, repent. My throat constricted. Words failed me. Abruptly, a chill wind, impossible in this sealed space, sliced through the stagnant air, rustling my clothes, raising goose flesh on my neck. I spun around. Near the last pew, a flicker of light, less than a heartbeat, a faint, human-shaped luminescence, then gone. I stood rooted, paralyzed. The hair on my arms prickled. My knees threatened to buckle. I stared at the spot where the glow had been, breath trapped in my lungs, until a shaky exhale escaped me. My mind scrambled. "Flee!" one part screamed. "Understand?" another insisted. Closing my eyes, I murmured a desperate, formless prayer for clarity. Opening them, the scene remained unchanged. Decay, shadows, and an oppressive, watchful presence. I knew I had to leave, for now. But I also knew, with chilling certainty, that I would be back. Something here had laid claim to a part of me, and the need to comprehend its nature was a hook I couldn't dislodge. The following days were haunted. The cathedral permeated my waking thoughts, eclipsing work, bleaching the solace from my usual church services. My mind drifted constantly to the sibilant whispers, the phantom glow. Sleep offered no escape. Dreams replayed the dusty pews, the shadowed corridors. I'd wake slick with cold sweat, heart hammering, convinced I'd heard my name echoing in the darkness of my own room. After several such nights, the decision solidified. I had to return. Perhaps it was madness, but I needed tangible proof, something to anchor me against the tide pulling me under. Re-entering the cathedral, the cold felt more profound, biting deeper than before. Near the entrance, I tried a light switch. It remained dead. I'd come prepared this time, armed with a small torch. Its beam cut narrow swaths through the ink, illuminating more broken tiles, elaborate cobwebs like macabre lace, drifts of forgotten bulletins carpeting the floor. The desolation felt absolute, yet the sensation of being observed prickled at the back of my neck. A faint rustling near the confessionals drew me forward, my steps measured, deliberately quiet. Back in that alcove of shadowed wood, I found more notes. One seemed newer, the ink less faded. It spoke of voices that know my failings, of an unseen force demanding my confessions. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Initials marked the bottom, blurred and indecipherable. A soft creak sounded directly behind me. I whirled, sweeping the torch beam across the floor, the walls. Nothing. Then the whispers returned, insidious, seeming to drift on unseen currents through the corridors. My heart thumped a heavy, painful rhythm. My stomach twisted into knots. I held still, listening intently. The whispers gained focus, sharpened. My name, again, and then. They spoke of regrets I barely acknowledged even to myself. Sins buried beneath years of denial. Youthful transgressions, choices whose weight I still carried in secret. My head swam. The blood seemed to drain from my face. "Show yourself," I shouted, the sound raw, desperate. Only the echo answered, mocking my fear. My hand tightened on the torch, knuckles white. Retreating towards the main altar, a grim certainty settled. If this presence were to manifest, it would be there. The atmosphere grew thick, viscous, as if I were wading against an unseen current. Breathing became a conscious effort. My pulse roared in my ears. Reaching the altar, I swept the torchlight around. For a sliver of a second, the glow, brighter this time, positioned near the tabernacle. My hand trembled violently, making the beam dance. The figure, if it was a figure, dissolved, leaving only agitated dust motes swirling in the artificial light. This time, I found my voice. "I am here," I managed, the words feeling foolishly inadequate in the echoing void. "I don't understand what you want, but I'm here," I continued, propelled by a need to fill the oppressive silence. "If I have disturbed this place, I am sorry." The strange wind returned, swirling around the altar steps, and beneath my feet, I sensed, or perhaps imagined, a low chanting, vibrating up through the stone. My mouth was utterly dry. Swallowing felt impossible. A voice, disembodied, chillingly close, whispered, "Confessa. Confess." It was so near I nearly dropped the torch. I recoiled, stumbling backward, words utterly failing me. Images flooded my mind. Every lie, every failure, every hidden shame. Pressing a hand to my chest, feeling the frantic drumming beneath, I stammered another apology. The chanting subsided. I waited, suspended in agonizing silence, unsure what to do next. After several long minutes, the tension unbearable, I turned and fled, hurrying towards the door, feeling drained, violated, and profoundly unsettled. Over the next week, I returned 4 more times, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't rationalize. Each visit saw the whispers grow bolder, more insistent. I tried engaging, reasoning, but the voices only intensified their demands for intimate confession. They named specific events, moments plucked from decades past, instances of dishonesty, crises of faith I thought buried forever. The onslaught was almost unbearable. My chest grew tight with each visit. I left feeling lightheaded, nauseous. Yet the desperate need to understand why chained me to this cycle. By the 5th visit, the cathedral felt palpably sentient. Doors I distinctly remember leaving open were found shut. Pews seemed subtly shifted from their previous positions. Footsteps echoed mine down the aisles, yet turning revealed only emptiness. More notes appeared, tucked into hymnals, wedged in cracks, all chronicling experiences mirroring my own. Names called from the shadows, fleeting glimpses of radiant shapes near the altar. Never a person, always the glow, the voices. My physical state deteriorated. Sleep became a luxury. Concentration fractured. Concerned friends inquired about my pallor, my distraction. I deflected with lies about a lingering cold. Prayer in my familiar parish church brought no peace. My thoughts inevitably strayed back to the decaying grandeur and invasive presence of the abandoned cathedral. A chilling suspicion began to form. Something resided there, something ancient and hungry, that fed on human frailty, on guilt. I am not prone to sane portents, but the evidence of its effect on me was undeniable. One final visit. I resolved it would be the last. I would offer what is seemed to demand, then sever the connection, lock the door on this chapter of my life. I chose late afternoon again, unwilling to face the intensified darkness of night. A small, worn cross rested heavy in my pocket. A thicker jacket served as inadequate armor against the encroaching chill. Stepping inside, the cold struck instantly, penetrating layers, settling deep in my bones. The interior was dimmer than ever, the stained glass filtering only the weakest vestiges of daylight. I navigated the familiar path to the altar, stood before the dusty cloth and leaning candelabra, forcing my gaze forward. My voice trembled, but I spoke aloud. I confessed. Everything. Every shadowed corner of my memory. Every sin that festered. Every doubt that chipped away at my faith. I laid them bare, unadorned, simply stating the facts of my failings. Sweat slicked my palms. My legs felt unsteady, threatening to betray me. The chanting erupted, louder than ever before, swirling around me like a vortex. A high ringing filled my ears. My body tensed, braced against an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. I forced myself to continue, pushing the words out, admitting fault after fault. The voices reached a roaring crescendo, then snapped into absolute silence. The sudden void was so profound, I could hear the frantic thrum of my own blood. For an instant, I thought I saw it. The glow, directly before me, brighter, almost blinding. My eyes stung from refusing to blink. Then, it imploded, vanishing into the oppressive dark. I remained there for a minute, maybe two, breathing heavily, mind racing. A fragile sense of relief began to pool in my chest, the loosening of a tightly wound knot. The whispers were gone. I listened, straining, hearing only the rasp of my own breath. The air remained cold, but the invasive presence felt sated, appeased. Slowly, deliberately, I walked back towards the entrance, resisting the urge to look back. I stepped out into the fading afternoon light, pulling the heavy oak door firmly shut behind me. It latched with a sound of finality. Since that day, I have not returned. Sometimes, passing by, I see the gate chained once more, the windows dark, the cathedral withdrawn into its posture of abandonment. I cannot know if others still hear the whispers, still glimpse the phantom light within its walls. I only know that confronting the darkness within myself seemed to silence the darkness there. Yet, an unease lingers whenever I walk that street, a feeling of being watched by something cold and patient from behind the stone. My faith endures, but it carries a new fragility now, forever marked by the memory of that voice, calling my name from the shadows. I suspect that echo will never truly leave me. The cardiac monitor pulsed its metronomic rhythm to the deep quiet of the hospital wing, a solitary heartbeat in the echoing silence. 2:37 a.m. glowed on Alara Vance's watch face, hours yet before the gray relief of dawn. Then she manifested, a patient adrift at the hallway's terminus, the thin cotton of her gown stirring as if touched by an errant draft. Impossible, though. This wing was hermetically sealed. Ward 4 East, dormant for months, cocooned in the dust of renovations. Ilara Vance. 5 years navigating the spectral landscape of the night shift at St. Jude's Medical Center. She'd witnessed the frantic ballet of resuscitation, the lunar tides of human strangeness, even the harried recapture of souls briefly escaped from psychiatric moorings. None of it, not the chaos, nor the quiet desperation, had forged armor sufficient for this night. It began unremarkably, a shift painted in familiar shades of antiseptic white and muted urgency. Rounds completed, patients accounted for, Ilara had retreated to the fluorescent haven of the nurses' station, nursing lukewarm coffee. Ward 4. East, her current domain, held only 3 souls tonight, all stable, submerged in sleep. Charting beckoned, yet as her pen scratched across the paper, a dissonance crept into the air. A palpable weight descended, the atmosphere prickling, charged with an unseen current that lifted the fine hairs along her forearms. A storm brewing. She glanced towards the windows, but they framed only a serene, star-dusted obsidian. That's when the first flicker occurred, a peripheral tremor, the silhouette in pallid fabric, stationed leagues down the corridor. Ilara's head snapped up, gone. She blinked, attributing the phantom to fatigue's cruel artistry, caffeine's deceptive clarity, but a cold knot tightened low in her gut, an instinct honed by years of vigilance, whispering that the quiet was a lie. Another round, then, just to quell the unease. Room by room she moved, a silent guardian. Mr. Alistair Finch in 401, his snores a gentle rasp. Mrs. Anya Sharma in 402, tethered to the steady sigh of her oxygen concentrator. In 403, Ilara froze, breath catching. The bed linens lay in turbulent waves, the mattress starkly empty. Her pulse leaped. The ensuite bathroom yielded nothing. Heart hammering, she spun back towards the station, fingers already anticipating the code yellow sequence. But reaching for the console, she saw her again. Poised at the threshold where their functioning ward bled into the derelict wing, the figure stood with her back turned. Dark hair cascaded past slender shoulders, her form etched against the deeper darkness beyond. "Excuse me," Ilara called, her voice startlingly loud in the stillness. "You need to be in bed. Can I help you find your room?" Silence answered. Not a twitch, not a turn. Only that unnerving stillness. A shiver traced Ilara's spine, cold and sharp, but professionalism asserted itself. A disoriented patient, lost and needing guidance. She advanced, her soft-soled shoes amplifying each step on the polished linoleum. "Ma'am," she tried again, closing the distance. "Are you feeling all right?" Still nothing. Mere feet separated them now. Ilara reached out, aiming for the fragile curve of the woman's shoulder. Her fingers met only air, passing through the apparition as if it were smoke. She stumbled backward, a gasp escaping her lips, the floor suddenly unsteady beneath her. Slowly, deliberately, the figure pivoted. Ilara found herself gazing into a young woman's face, skin bleached to near translucence. The eyes. The eyes were abyssal pools, utterly black, twin voids swallowing the dim light. The mouth opened, shaping a sound not of words, but a low, keening moan that seemed to vibrate in Alara's bones. Simultaneously, the overhead lights stuttered and an arctic wave crashed over her. She fled. Pride evaporated, training dissolved. Pure instinct propelled her back towards the relative safety of the nurse's station, breath tearing raggedly from her lungs. She snatched the phone, her hand trembling violently as she stabbed the digits for security. Ilara Vance, Ward 4 East, she choked out when the line connected. Requesting immediate assistance. Intruder on the floor. Intruder. The voice on the other end held a weary skepticism. You certain it isn't just one of your patients wandering, Nurse Vance? No, Alara insisted, the word sharp with residual terror. This isn't... it's something else. Please, just come up. Disconnecting, she risked a glance down the hallway, half convinced the spectral woman would be inches away. Empty. Yet the oppressive quality lingered, thick and expectant, like the charged stillness before lightning splits the sky. Deep breaths. She forced air into her constricted lungs, trying to impose order on her frantic heart. Logic scrabbled for purchase. Exhaustion. Hallucination. An elaborate, cruel prank. The visceral memory of her hand passing through incorporeal fabric. The sight of those vacant eyes. No. This defied rational explanation. It felt ancient. Primal. The elevator chimed its arrival, disgorging 2 uniformed security officers. Alara relayed the encounter, omitting the impossible physics of her touch, knowing instinctively how it would be received. Okay, the senior guard acknowledged, his brow furrowed with concern. We'll sweep the area. You remain here at the station. Radio us if anything changes. Anything. She nodded, a surge of gratitude warming her slightly. Their solid presence, the beam of their flashlights slicing methodically through the gloom as they moved down the corridor, offered a fragile bulwark against the fear. She wasn't alone. But the minutes stretched, elongating into an unnatural quiet. They should have returned by now. The ward wasn't vast. Just as she reached for the radio, the world plunged into absolute darkness. Main power, emergency backups, everything extinguished simultaneously. Only the faint, ghostly luminescence of the computer monitors at the station remained. And then, sound bloomed in the sudden void, footsteps approaching from the abandoned wing. Not the guard's heavy, reassuring tread, but something lighter, more ethereal, a whisper of movement. Fumbling, Alara activated her phone's flashlight, its beam a feeble weapon against the engulfing black. She swept it down the hallway. Her blood ran cold. She was there, the woman, but not solitary this time. Behind her drifted others, dozens perhaps, spectral figures clad in hospital gowns, their faces marred by the same empty, lightless eyes. They advanced, a silent tide, their motion disjointed, subtly wrong. Alara retreated, her mind screaming. Run! But her limbs felt leaden, rooted to the spot. As the phantasmal crowd drew nearer, faces swam into horrifying focus. Mr. Silas Croft, lost to cardiac arrest just last month. Miss Evelyn Reed, whose battle with cancer ended only days ago. And leading them. Alara's breath hitched. Dr. Eris Thorne, her mentor, gone these many years. They encircled her, their collective presence an icy pressure making each breath an effort. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for oblivion. Then, a touch on her shoulder, startlingly solid, warm. Her eyes flew open. Dr. Thorne stood before her, not the hollow-eyed specter, but the man she remembered, his gaze filled with familiar kindness. He smiled. "It's all right, Alara." His voice resonated, seeming to echo from a vast distance. "We mean you no harm." What is this?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "A thinning," he replied, his voice gentle yet profound. "The veil between worlds grows porous on this night. Once each year, we can step across, briefly. But why?" Alara glanced at the silent congregation of familiar, lost faces. Why return? A melancholic smile touched Dr. Thorne's lips. Some carry unfinished tasks. Some merely yearn for a final glimpse of those they loved. And some, he paused, his gaze locking with hers, intense and meaningful. Some return bearing messages. He leaned closer, his whispered words weaving into the fabric of her soul, altering the landscape of her reality forever. As he spoke, the surrounding spirits began to dissolve like mist, the profound darkness receding. When his message concluded, Alara stood alone once more in the corridor, the lights flickering hesitantly back to life. She remained motionless, stunned, the immensity of the encounter washing over her in waves. The elevator chimed again. The security guards emerged, looking perplexed. "You page us again, Nurse Vance," one asked. "We got a signal, but when we came up earlier, the place was quiet as a tomb." Alara opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she articulate the impossible? "My mistake," she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign. "False alarm. Everything's secure now." After they departed, she collapsed into the chair at the nurse's station, her thoughts a maelstrom. Morning would bring choices, difficult ones, stemming from Dr. Thorne's revelation, a truth she couldn't unhear, couldn't ignore. But for now, as the first tentative fingers of dawn probed the windows, she simply allowed herself to breathe, to exist within a universe suddenly revealed as infinitely larger, stranger, and more saturated with wonder than she had ever dared to conceive. The night shift, and Alara Vance with it, had been irrevocably transformed. The heavy lock groaned shut behind Elias, the sound swallowed by the stillness. He stood motionless for a breath, acclimating. Fourth floor, ancient heart of the city. This room felt less like a haven, and more like a constriction. Beneath his worn boots, the floorboards possessed an unsettling undulation. Fissures webbed the wallpaper like dry veins. Overhead, molded into the aged stucco ceiling, perhaps half a dozen faces regarded him with vacant hollows, for eyes and lips stretched thin and bloodless. Decorative grotesques, he initially surmised, familiar flourishes in time-worn guest houses. Yet these felt different. Their gaze seemed unnervingly deep, and passing beneath them provoked a prickling sensation, an illusion of scrutiny tracking his every shift and weight. He tried shrugging off the unease, tossing his travel-worn satchel onto the narrow bed. Beyond the grimy window panes lay a street choked with skeletal ruins, mere assemblages of weathered stone and moss-furred arches he'd noted dispassionately by day. Now, however, twilight bled into night, and from somewhere near those derelict structures arose a high, thin susurrus. It sounded like voices, chanting without melody, a formless ululation. Elias edged closer to the window, peering through the warped glass, its surface clouded with decades of grime. No figures moved among the ruins, only the stark silhouettes of fractured walls and columns cast by a solitary, anemic street lamp. Still, the sound persisted, distinct as a knot of whispers and keening woven together, words lost in a continuous, reedy whine. Stepping back, Elias forced his attention elsewhere. The bed, diminutive, its mattress unforgivingly stiff. A lone chair slumped in one corner, a tiny table pressed defensively against the wall. An aroma hung in the air, old paper, the dry decay of neglected draperies. A peculiar impulse drove him to inspect the walls, perhaps seeking reassurance in the building's solidity, a way to ground himself. As his palm flattened against the patterned paper, a strange sensation met his touch, a subtle vibration, a faint, rhythmic pulse, steady, almost like laying a hand over a weak, submerged heartbeat. Holding his breath, he kept his hand there, the thrumming constant, unwavering. It was everywhere. Shifting his touch yielded the same quiet rhythm. Disquiet coiled within him. He snatched his hand back, shaking it instinctively, as if having brushed against something unexpectedly warm, alive. His gaze flickered upward. The plaster faces remained static, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. His throat felt tight, papery dry. Pressing his lips together, he sought refuge in the mundane. His watch read nearly 10. Fatigue from the journey pressed down, a heavy cloak urging rest. Beside the bed, a small lamp sputtered to life when switched on, its weak glow faltering intermittently. He decided to wash the travel grime from his face. The communal washroom lay down the corridor. Unlocking his door, the mechanism grating, he stepped into the long, narrow passage. Each footfall elicited a groan from the warped wooden planks. Silence reigned. No other doors opened or closed. No footsteps echoed his own. Reaching the washroom, he turned the tarnished knob and entered. A single, dim bulb illuminated the space. Rust bloomed like dried blood around the sink's drain. He twisted the faucet, bracing for icy water. It flowed lukewarm, disturbingly close to body temperature. He splashed it onto his face regardless, the sensation unpleasant but necessary to rinse away the clammy sweat gathering at his nape. Toweling dry with a small cloth brought from his room, he paused, listening intently. Out here, the corridor was utterly silent. The chanting voices were gone. Returning to his room, Elias secured the lock once more, then wedged the spindly chair beneath the doorknob, an act of caution whose necessity he couldn't quite articulate, yet it offered a sliver of perceived safety. He perched on the edge of the bed, surveying his confines. The ceiling held its silent counsel, the faces staring downward. A palpable weight seemed to have settled in the air, making each breath feel denser, more deliberate. Though the window remained shut, a thin, cool draft snaked through the ill-fitting frame. Outside, the chanting had resumed, but altered. Quieter now, more distant, as if receding or slowly being extinguished. Relief warred with the room's own unnerving quietude. A faint ringing filled his ears as he tried to anchor his focus on minutiae. The wallpaper's faded floral pattern, the specific curve of the brass doorknob. the hairline cracks snaking near the floorboards. He decided to lie down, boots still laced. His head sank slightly into the thin pillow. The mattress springs protested beneath his weight. For a long while, he simply lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The plaster faces seemed subtly changed, shadows pooling deeper within their eye sockets and around their mouths. Was it the lamp's unsteady light? He checked. The bulb now burned with a steady, unwavering luminescence. The shadows, then, were born of perspective, of his own tired eyes. He willed himself to ignore it, squeezed his eyes shut, striving for the calm oblivion of sleep. After a minute, perhaps two, he felt it. A minute shift, barely perceptible, as if the bed frame had infinitesimally moved. His eyes snapped open. The room appeared unchanged. He strained his ears. Silence. Tentatively, from his prone position, he reached out, touching the wall beside the bed. The pulse was still there. He recoiled. Across the room, the floor creaked, though he hadn't shifted significantly. His heart hammered against his ribs. Old building. He reasoned silently. Prone to settling. Strange acoustics. Time stretched, marked only by the slow creep of his watch hands. Nearly midnight. The air grew warmer, closer. He sat up, wrestling with the window, trying to force it open wider for ventilation. But the frame was jammed fast. He shoved harder. The wood rattled impotently. Defeated, he paced the small space, wipe his perspiration from his brow. The door remained secured, the chair firmly wedged. The thought of leaving, finding refuge in a late-night cafe, flickered and died. The building's main entrance was likely barred, and the prospect of navigating the labyrinthine, deserted streets held little appeal. The historic center slept uneasily after dark. He found himself by the wall opposite the bed, tracing its surface with his fingertips. That persistent, rhythmic thrum met his touch. He pressed harder. Beneath his fingers, the wallpaper yielded slightly, a soft bulge forming as if something pliable lay beneath. Applying more pressure, he felt a gentle, almost organic resistance before pulling his hand away sharply. A knot tightened in his stomach. Breathing shallowly through his mouth, he fought rising panic. He sat down again, gaze inevitably drawn upward. The plaster faces seemed to lean in now, their scrutiny more focused, their empty eyes somehow darker. Intellectually, he knew it was plaster, paint, shadow. Yet instincts screamed they were aware, attentive. He extinguished the lamp, hoping darkness might grant peace. Stygian gloom filled the room, punctuated only by the faint exterior light filtering through the grimy window. Slowly, his vision adjusted, resolving the pale outlines of the ceiling faces against the deeper black. He immediately regretted his choice. Obscurity amplified uncertainty. The lamp clicked back on, its bulb emitting a soft hum. It was then he heard it. A faint, dry scratching from the far corner, near the floor, like delicate claws worrying at wood or plaster. He froze, listening. The sound ceased. He took a cautious step forward. Silence. Rats, perhaps. Insects. Pests were common in such ancient structures. He could accept that. But the scratching resumed, this time higher up the wall, closer to shoulder height. He retreated instinctively towards the door, turning his head, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound seemed to migrate along the wall's surface, yet visually, nothing stirred. The wallpaper remained intact, the plaster undisturbed. Only that soft, insidious scraping persisted. His breath hitched. Sweat trickled down his spine. His hand found the doorknob. Escape. He removed the chair, turned the knob. The door swung inward silently. He peered into the corridor, a long ribbon of darkness, relieved only by the weak glow from the distant washroom. Stepping out, he inhaled the scent of old wood and stale air. Utter emptiness. He considered descending to the lobby, but recalled the deserted reception desk. What if the lights were out downstairs? He might lose his way. Better to remain on this floor. Maybe just sit in the hallway. He sank to the cold floorboards outside his room, leaning his back against the wall, attempting to gather his frayed nerves. The corridor offered only silence, yet after a few minutes, the exposure felt worse. He couldn't see the full length of the hall, couldn't anticipate what might emerge from the shadowed corners or closed doorways. Rising quickly, he retreated back into his room, the click of the lock echoing, the chair wedged once more beneath the knob. Inside, the heat and stuffiness were immediate. Faintly, the external voices had begun their strange, tuneless litany again, sharper this time, though still indecipherable. He pressed his face close to the window crack. Nothing but ruins and dim light. Pressing his ear to the cool glass brought the voices nearer, yet yielded no words, only those unnerving, fluctuating tones. His gaze drifted back to the ceiling. It was impossible not to look. He could swear the faces had altered again. Their thin lips seemed slightly parted now, forming silent O's. Nausea surged. He squinted, desperate to dismiss it as illusion, a trick of light on the plaster's contours. The sculpted lines did suggest parted lips, perhaps exacerbated by shadow. But the conviction remained. These faces were concentrating on him. He moved about the room, testing his perception, watching the eyes. A sideways step seemed to make one face's gaze tilt fractionally, but a direct look revealed the same static carving. The scratching sound returned directly behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Just the wall, cracked paper, old paint. He wanted to touch it, to feel for the pulse, but fear held him back. Instead, he struck it lightly with his fist. A dull thud answered. After a moment's hesitation, he pressed his palm flat against the surface. The pulsing was there, undeniably stronger now. A tingling spread through his fingers. He yanked his hand away as if burned. He stood stranded in the room's center, breathing raggedly, mind racing for a plan. Any plan. The air felt thick, coating his throat. His shirt clung damply to his skin. Wiping his brow again, he resolved to try sleep one last time. It was deep into the night. Surely dawn couldn't be far off. If he could just endure, just rest, morning would bring release. He killed the lamp, lay stiffly on the bed, and forced his eyes shut. Sleep remained elusive. Every few seconds his eyelids fluttered open, his senses hyper-alert, anticipating movement, sound. After an indeterminate time, a faint tapping began near the window. He lay still, listening. The tapping intensified, rhythmic, like fingernails drumming lightly on the glass. Sitting up slowly, he scanned the window. Nothing visible, just the dark rectangle framing the night beyond. He crept closer, touching the pane. It felt strangely warm. Pressing his ear against it, he heard the distant, thin chanting persist. Then, a flicker of movement at his periphery. He turned sharply towards the wall beside the door. A faint contour pressed outward against the plaster, like the impression of slender fingers pushing from within. He saw the surface bulge in narrow, distinct lines, accompanied by a soft, crackling sound, the stretched paper protesting. The plaster held, but only just. He stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. The shape vanished the moment he moved. Reaching out a trembling hand, he touched the spot. The wallpaper felt oddly damp. He snatched his hand back. He retreated until his back met the opposite wall, his legs threatening to buckle. Sleep was now an absurd notion. He remained awake, pacing the confines of the room, periodically checking the locked door. Several times he grasped the knob, intending to flee, but each glance into the dark, silent hallway felt like trading one prison for another, larger, more unpredictable one. Here, at least, his enemies were contained, visible. The four walls, the ceiling. Time bled away. More sounds surfaced, scratching, tapping, soft, intermittent knocking. Sometimes the plaster would swell, as if something substantial shifted beneath. Once, he thought he glimpsed a pale, hand-like shape, sliding fluidly along the wall, fingers splayed, leaving no trace but a faint, rubbing whisper. It never broke through. The integrity of the wall, miraculously, held. His mouth was parched, his breathing shallow and rapid. Vertigo threatened, forcing him to sit periodically. Each minute stretched into an eternity. His watch showed it was past 2. He pulled out his phone. No signal bars illuminated the screen. He tried calling out anyway, a futile gesture. He shouted, "Hello, is anyone there?" His voice sounded small, absorbed by the oppressive room. No reply came. He stayed near the door, listening to the hallway beyond. A low, mechanical hum vibrated faintly from somewhere outside the room. Machinery, perhaps, or wind in an unseen vent. It offered no comfort. His attention kept snapping back to the walls. The bulges appeared and receded unpredictably. He saw long, thin finger shapes press momentarily against the plaster. He heard quiet scraping, like nails dragged across the hidden side. With each incident, his chest constricted, muscles locking in tension. Hours crawled by. He tried to avert his gaze from the walls by focusing on the ceiling. The faces maintained their silent vigil. Their expressions hadn't shifted further, but the oppressive sense of their awareness remained absolute. He flicked the lamp on and off repeatedly, testing if light altered the phenomena. It made no difference. Eventually, the chanting from the ruins outside dwindled and finally ceased altogether. Peering through the window, he saw the first faint dilution of night in the eastern sky. Dawn was approaching. Concurrently, the tapping and scratching sounds slowed, grew less frequent. The plaster ceased its disturbing undulations. The walls felt solid once more. Tentatively, he placed his palm against them. The pulse was still detectable, but faint now, a mere echo of its former strength. Tension still gripped him, yet a sliver of relief penetrated the fear. The night was ending. He waited until the sky outside transitioned from charcoal to bruised purple, then to gray. When the ruins emerged from the gloom, sharp-edged and distinct, he knew it was time. He didn't bother packing, simply seized his satchel and wrenched the door open. The hallway lay empty, rendered less menacing by the nascent daylight filtering from a high window at the far end. He hurried down the creaking stairs, his footsteps loud in the pre-dawn stillness. The lobby was deserted, the reception desk unmanned. He pushed open the heavy front door. It swung outward without resistance. Cool, fresh air met his face like a benediction. He stepped onto the pavement and began walking, quickening his pace, not stopping until he reached a wider, more populated thoroughfare. Glancing back just once, he saw the old building looming silent and impassive against the brightening sky. Elias drew a deep, shuddering breath and kept moving, determined to find lodging elsewhere, no matter how far he had to walk. The instant the county marker blurred past the window, a palpable wrongness settled over us. The very air felt clotted, shadows pooling unnaturally deep despite the afternoon sun, and a coldness entirely separate from the breeze prickled down my vertebrae. We couldn't have known then, turning off the highway into this forgotten fold of the map, that we were driving headlong into a labyrinth of fear beyond reckoning. It was meant to be freedom distilled, a final, sun-drenched road trip for me, and the three souls who'd become my anchors through university, Maya, Ben, and Chloe. Months we'd dreamt of this escape, a last shared breath before scattering to the winds of postgraduate life. Just the asphalt ribbon unfurling, a soundtrack of shared anthems, and the intoxicating promise of the unknown. What, we'd asked ourselves, could possibly sour such perfection? As fate would have it, everything. Hours had melted away, the world outside a hypnotic montage of whispering cornrows and skeletal gas pumps. My grip tightened on the wheel, the third can of syrupy caffeine barely keeping the highway hypnosis at bay. Leo. Ben's voice drifted from the back, muffled by the phone pressed to his ear. Pretty sure our exit was like 20 miles ago. A groan escaped me as my eyes flickered to the needle-kissing E. You serious? Find somewhere, anywhere, we can flip around and grab gas. Maya, beside me in the passenger seat, was already coaxing the temperamental GPS. There's a place, Oakhaven, just up ahead. Map says it has fuel. Quick stop, refuel, reroute. Simple. A plan born of necessity, fatally logical. If only foresight were as common as regret. Rolling towards Oakhaven, the silence struck first. Our radio, moments before spilling out chart-topping effervescence, dissolved into a shower of static. Chloe leaned forward, twisting the dial through the spectrum, finding only variations of white noise punctuated by guttural bursts that almost formed words, but slid away before meaning could coalesce. Weird, she murmured, finally silencing the hiss. The quiet that rushed in felt heavy, suffocating, disturbed only by the rhythmic crunch of our tires on the fractured pavement. We passed a weathered placard. Welcome to Oakhaven. Population 126. Yet the main thoroughfare told a different story. Desolation reigned. Shop windows gaped like empty sockets behind crude boards, vehicles slumped rusting by the roadside, and not a single living soul stirred. Guys, Maya breathed, her voice thin. This feels wrong. Maybe we should just turn back. Her unease resonated with my own, but the decision was wrested from us. The engine gave a rattling cough, a final gasp as it starved. We coasted to a halt before the skeletal remains of what might have been a diner. Cursing under my breath, I twisted the key in the ignition. Nothing. Okay. I forced out, aiming for calm. No panic. Gas. That's all. Someone has to be here. We spilled out, the car doors thudding shut with a grim resonance. The air hung thick and motionless, tinged with a faint, unsettling sweetness, like decay masked by cheap perfume. "Hello," Ben shouted, his voice swallowed by the void, echoing strangely down the deserted street. "Anyone? Need a hand here." Only the rhythmic squeak of a loose sign, swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel, answered. "Stick close," I urged, my own voice tighter than intended. "Let's find that station. Maya, where did the GPS place it?" Maya consulted her phone, her brow furrowing. "Huh. 0 bars. And the map app. It's just blank." A collective disquiet descended as we began to walk. Each building slumped further into ruin than the last, suggesting decades of neglect. Yet, paradoxes lingered. A newspaper dated only days prior resting on a park bench, a half-drunk mug staining a windowsill, and the watching. An undeniable pressure on the back of my neck, a flicker of motion always just dissolving at the edge of my vision whenever I dared to look. 3 blocks crawled by before Chloe froze. "Did you hear that?" We strained, holding our breath. Then it reached us. A faint, melodic sound. Children laughing. It seemed to emanate from an alleyway nearby. Against every screaming instinct, we drifted towards it. The laughter swelled, bright and chillingly clear, yet peering into the narrow, refuse-choked passage, revealed only a brick wall dead end. "Right. This is officially maximum creep," Ben muttered, backing away. "Gas station. Now. Out." We turned, ready to flee, and found our way barred. A cluster of figures materialized at the alley's mouth, utterly silent, preternaturally still. There was an inherent wrongness to them. Their attire belonged to another era, their complexions unnervingly pallid, almost luminous like wax in the dwindling light. Excuse us," I stammered, voice trembling betrayingly. "Just looking for gas. Car trouble." No reaction, just vacant stares from eyes like polished obsidian. "Please," Maya pleaded, her voice cracking. "No trouble. We just need help." Slowly, with a synchronicity that defied nature, their heads swiveled towards Maya, and then, as one, they smiled. Mouths stretching impossibly wide, splitting pale faces to reveal far too many teeth, sharp and stained yellow. We bolted. The next moments are a blur of pounding feet on broken concrete, ragged gasps tearing at our lungs, and the bone-deep certainty that slowing down meant annihilation. We skidded to a halt in the overgrown remnants of a town square, lungs burning. A sickening realization hit me. We were separated. Ben and Chloe were gone. "Find them," Maya choked out, clutching a stitch in her side. I nodded, battling the icy wave of panic. "Okay. Think. Where would they..." A scream ripped through the stagnant air. Ben's voice. From somewhere to our left. Thought dissolved. Instinct took over. We ran again, crashing through brittle hedges towards the sound. We found Ben near the steps of the town hall, a hulking, shadowed edifice that loomed over the square. He was on his knees, staring upward. Following his gaze, I saw Chloe. But it wasn't Chloe. Not anymore. She stood with an unnatural rigidity, her head canted at an angle that should have snapped bone. And her eyes, They were fathomless black voids, reflecting the dying light like twin pools of crude oil. "Chloe," Maya called, her voice a fragile thread. "Chloe, you okay?" Chloe's head snapped towards us, the movement too swift, too mechanical. And she smiled, that same horrifying predatory rictus we'd fled from. "Welcome home," she rasped, the voice impossibly deep, ancient, vibrating with a malice that turned my blood to ice. Ben scrambled upright, launching himself towards us. "Go," he gasped, eyes wild with terror. "Now." We needed no convincing. We fled, Chloe's inhuman laughter echoing, bouncing off the decaying facades behind us. As we sprinted through the deepening twilight, the shadows stretched like grasping fingers, the very darkness seeming to coalesce, hunting us. They were everywhere now, the town's silent denizens, never running, never rushing, simply appearing, blocking potential escape routes, their black eyes and stretched smiles fueling a primal dread. Somehow, impossibly, we found ourselves back at the car. The street teemed with them, a silent, closing circle. "The car," I yelled, fumbling with the handle. "Get in." We tumbled inside, slamming locks. I jammed the key, chanting a desperate prayer. The engine roared to life. No time for questions, no room for disbelief. I stomped the accelerator. The figures didn't flinch, didn't try to stop us. We hit them. They dissolved on impact, bursting into plumes of oily black smoke that dissipated instantly. I drove like a man possessed, blind to direction, propelled only by the need for distance. Oakhaven seemed reluctant to release us, its streets twisting, looping back on themselves. Then, abruptly, freedom. The now leaving Oakhaven sign whipped past, and the suffocating weight lifted as if a switch had been thrown. The radio crackled, spitting out some vapid pop song, a sound so jarringly normal it felt obscene. We drove in heavy silence for what felt like an eternity, each trapped in the replay of horrors. Maya finally broke the quiet. What happens now? My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We keep driving," I said, the words feeling hollow. "And we never talk about this again." A futile vow, even as I spoke it. Oakhaven wasn't something you forgot. And deep down, a cold certainty settled. Oakhaven hadn't forgotten us. As the miles devoured the highway behind us, the terror shifted, subtler now. That moment Chloe spoke, when that thing wearing our friend's face welcomed us home. I'd felt it. A tether. A shard of Oakhaven lodged deep within, following us out. We might have escaped its physical borders, but I fear its grasp remains. Someday, somehow, it will call us back. For now, we just drive. And try very hard not to focus on the rearview mirror, where sometimes, in the deepest shadows, I swear I see two black eyes and a smile stretched just a little too wide. A season of fractures propelled me outward, toward the vast, silent indifference of the wild. Months had frayed my edges, thinning my patience, and the notion of dissolving into some place devoid of clamor, no deadlines, no voices, no concrete hum, became a singular obsession. My car devoured the miles, spitting me out hours later into a pocket of wilderness untouched by trails, deep beside a dense, brooding forest. Solitude was absolute. No other soul marred the perfection of my isolation. This raw emptiness, the sheer lack of human echo, was precisely the balm I craved. Near a clearing where a slender stream whispered over stones, my shelter rose, a small dome against the towering trees. The first day bled away in aimless wandering, a slow absorption of the woodland's muted symphony. Birdsong stitched the air, leaves rustled like secrets shared, and with each step deeper into the green embrace, the knots within me began to loosen. By the time twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and fading orange, a profound, welcome weariness had settled in my bones. I coaxed a modest blaze to life, its flames companions in the deepening gloom, and supped on beans straight from the can, mesmerized by the fire's dance against the encroaching dark. Beyond the flickering perimeter of light, the forest was an inkwell spill of night. The stream murmured its constant lullaby, punctuated by the distant, mournful query of an owl. Otherwise, stillness reigned. Hours dissolved as I sat, gaze lost in the embers, thoughts drifting like smoke. For the first time in what felt like an age, breath came easy. I was truly solitary, accountable only to the indifferent stars. As the fire waned, I fed it more wood, then leaned back, a comfortable lethargy stealing over me. Then, a dissonance, a susurrus, ghosting beneath the fire's crackle, faint yet sharp enough to pierce my reverie. It emanated from the blackness, a furtive rustling. I sat bolt upright, senses straining, head cocked against the snap and hiss of the flames. An animal, perhaps. A deer navigating the undergrowth, or something smaller, nocturnal. Yet the cadence felt wrong, measured, deliberate, the careful press of footfalls attempting silence. A frantic bird took flight in my ribs. My eyes scanned the impenetrable wall of darkness, encircling my small island of light, finding nothing. Imagination, I chided myself, the lonely mind's penchant for conjuring phantoms. You are alone. But the certainty wouldn't stick. A conviction lingered. Something watched from just beyond the firelight's reach. Frozen, I listened into the amplified silence, awaiting confirmation. Minutes stretched taut. The sound did not return. The woods resumed their passive quiet. I exhaled a breath I hadn't known I was holding, forcing my shoulders down. Nothing. Just the forest breathing around me. My earlier tranquility, however, remained elusive, replaced by a slow, seeping chill of unease. Suddenly, the vast darkness felt less like freedom and more like exposure. The fire seemed inadequate, a beacon rather than a shield. I resisted the urge to build it higher, unwilling to advertise my presence further, and let it sink to a dull glow, casting skeletal shadows that writhed on the bark of nearby trees. Eventually, exhaustion warred with apprehension, and I retreated into the thin sanctuary of nylon. Zipping the tent flap felt like sealing a tomb. Sleep, I hoped, would be a refuge. Yet lying there, cocooned in my sleeping bag, the darkness within the tent mirroring the immensity without. Every nocturnal sigh of the forest, the snap of a distant twig, the sigh of wind through pine needles, became magnified, suspect. My pulse drummed a nervous rhythm against the quiet. I must have drifted, however briefly, because awareness returned with a jolt, a dry slither against the tent fabric, unnervingly close. I shot upright, heart hammering, every nerve alight. Silence. Holding my breath, I listened, mind racing through impossible possibilities. It came again. A soft, dragging scrape, tracing a path along the nylon mere inches from my head. My hand, trembling, fumbled for the flashlight. Its anemic cone of light stabbed at the tent wall where the sound had originated. Nothing. Just taut, pale fabric. Drawing a shaky breath, I tried to regain control. Then, louder this time, more insistent. A palpable pressure bulging the taut wall beside me, as if something leaned against it, testing its give. Ice water flooded my veins. My hands shook uncontrollably. To stay inside was unthinkable. Yet the thought of confronting whatever waited outside was pure terror. Steeling myself with a gulp of air, I eased the zipper open a crack, a gateway to the unknown. The flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the immediate vicinity. Trees stood like silent sentinels. Shadows pooled deep and motionless. The stream glinted faintly in the distance. Nothing. For long moments, I remained crouched, head thrust into the cool night air, listening. The profound silence offered no answers. It was nothing. I desperately tried to persuade myself. Nerves frayed by solitude. Retreating, I zipped the tent shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness, and burrowed back into my sleeping bag, though sleep now felt like a distant country. Just as a semblance of calm began to settle, a new sound emerged, insidious and chilling. A thread of sound barely clinging to the silence, whispering, indistinct, impossible to parse. Was it even language? Or merely the wind teasing the leaves into speech? It didn't matter. The effect was instantaneous, visceral, a wave of prickling dread that raised every hair on my body. I lay rigid, straining to hear, to understand, convinced it was only the wind, yet knowing, with a sickening certainty, that it was not. It was a voice, low and muttering, a sibilant murmur devoid of discernible words, yet undeniably vocal, just outside my fragile shelter. My hand, slick with sweat, found the flashlight again. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I unzipped the tent flap, projecting the beam outward. The whispering snapped into a profound vacuum of sound. The abrupt silence was almost more terrifying. I swept the light in a frantic arc. Empty campsite, silent trees, impenetrable darkness. I recoiled back inside, sealing the flap tight, and sat there in the pitch black, clutching the flashlight like a talisman, too terrified to switch it off. Flee? Pack now and stumble through the dark. The thought was paralyzing. So I waited, huddled and small, keeping a vigil in the heart of the dark, listening to the crushing silence, waiting for the dawn, waiting for any sign that I was, or was not, truly alone. Morning arrived, indifferent gold filtering through the canopy, illuminating a scene of perfect, ordinary peace. A ragged exhalation of held terror escaped me, relief washing through in a dizzying wave. Whatever it was, the light had banished it. Without pause, I began a frenetic dismantling of my brief refuge, driven by an urgent need to be gone. Every snap of a twig underfoot during the hike back to the car sent me whirling around, eyes scanning the trees behind me. But the forest remained stubbornly empty, offering only the innocent chorus of birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Reaching the car felt like breaching sanctuary. Gear was thrown haphazardly into the back. The engine turning over was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. As I drove, putting miles between myself and that place, the immense relief was tainted by a persistent, unnerving sensation. The prickle of unseen eyes tracking my departure. A feeling that something remained, concealed within the trees, patient, even now, in the safety of distance and walls, when I close my eyes, the memory surfaces. That faint, sibilant whispering, an indelible echo in the quiet corners of my mind. That shriek clawing through the night, it wasn't born of human lungs. It was agony distilled, a sound so purely wretched it iced the marrow in my bones, jolting my heart into a stuttered halt. I stood paralyzed in Eleanor Vance's parlor, the brass key biting into my damp palm, a sudden, chilling certainty crystallizing within me. I'd blundered into depths far blacker, far more grotesque than any nightmare could conjure. It began, as such things often do, under the guise of simple kindness. Eleanor, the silver-haired woman whose tidy bungalow shared a fence line with my own patch of lawn, needed someone to look after her place. A week's visit to her daughter, she'd explained, her smile warm beneath kind eyes. Naturally, I agreed. 3 years we'd been neighbors, she, a purveyor of unexpected butterscotch cookies, and unsolicited, yet welcome, advice on rose bushes. The initial days unfolded with quiet predictability. Morning visits before the office grind to replenish the food bowl for Jasper, her sleek black cat. Evening stops to ensure all was well, perhaps sharing a silent moment with the feline shadow. Eleanor's home was a time capsule of meticulous order. Lace doilies perched on polished wood, walls papered in faded peonies, the air thick with the spectral sweetness of dried lavender. A grandmother's sanctuary, precisely as one might picture it. Then came the fourth evening, and the mundane shattered. Dinner finished, dusk bleeding purple and bruised orange across the suburban canvas. I ambled toward Eleanor's. An anomaly snagged my attention. The heavy floral curtains of the front window, usually tied back to welcome the dying light, were drawn tight. A barricade against the world. Odd, I mused. Perhaps Jasper had indulged in some feline redecorating. Unlocking the door, I stepped into the familiar scent of lavender, now laced with something else, something metallic and faint. Jasper, I called into the waiting hush. Kitty, where are you? Silence answered, thick and absolute. Usually Jasper materialized with a questioning meow, weaving figure eights around my ankles. Tonight, nothing stirred. A knot of unease tightened low in my gut as I ventured deeper. The parlor lay shrouded in gloom. My fingers found the switch, flicking it upward. Light flooded the space, revealing not sanctuary, but violation. The room, normally a testament to fastidious care, was ravaged. Picture frames lay face down, their glass fractured like spiderwebs. A porcelain shepherdess lay decapitated near a spray of shattered vase shards, and gouged into the plush fabric of the armchair were rents deeper, wider, more violent than any cat could inflict. My pulse hammered against my ribs. A break-in? Yet the television remained. Eleanor's cherished silver service gleamed untouched on the sideboard. Nothing tangible was missing. My mobile felt heavy in my hand, thumb hovering over the emergency number, when a sound scraped through the silence. Faint, rhythmic scratching, emanating from the basement door tucked away near the kitchen. Jasper. My voice trembled, betraying me. That you, boy. The scratching ceased instantly. A low growl followed, a guttural vibration that raised the hairs along my arms and neck. Not Jasper. Definitely, irrevocably, not the cat. Every instinct screamed retreat, flee, dial the number. But a morbid cocktail of curiosity and a misplaced concern for the missing animal tethered me there. Hesitantly, drawn by an invisible thread, I crept towards the basement door. The growl intensified with each step, morphing into a wet, ragged snarl. My hand, shaking violently, hovered inches from the tarnished brass knob. A ragged breath, then. I turned it. The door didn't merely open. It exploded inward, a concussive force throwing me off balance. I landed hard, the back of my skull cracking against the polished floorboards, stars bursting behind my eyes. Through a swimming haze, a shape emerged from the Stygian darkness below. Large, hunched, moving with a jerky, disjointed gait that was hideously wrong. Neither beast nor man. As my vision struggled to clear, details swam into focus. Clumps of matted, indeterminate fur. Limbs that bent at impossible, sickening angles. And eyes. Twin embers of baleful yellow, gleaming with cold awareness in the dim hallway light. It defied categorization, a fever dream fusion of wolf and something gaunter, something starved and broken. A strangled gasp escaped me as I scrambled backward on palms and heels, heart battering my ribcage like a trapped bird. The creature advanced, deliberate, inexorable. Saliva dripped in viscous strings from jaws too vast for its narrow skull. Those luminous eyes never left mine, holding a terrifying, calculating intelligence. And then came the scream I'd first heard outside, erupting from this entity, its maws stretching impossibly wide, unleashing that soul-flaying shriek that resonated deep within my own bones. Shock, paradoxically, lent me speed. Adrenaline surged, propelling me to my feet. I ran. Faster than track sprints in high school, faster than panic had ever pushed me. Behind me, the scrape and clatter of claws on hardwood spurred me onward. The creature pursued, its hot, fetid breath ghosting the nape of my neck as I reached the front door, fumbling, fingers slick with sweat at the deadbolt. Just as I felt that suffocating proximity, I wrenched the door open, stumbling, falling out onto the porch steps. I slammed the heavy oak shut, the impact followed immediately by a sickening thud from the other side. I didn't pause. I sprinted across the lawn, across my own threshold, slamming and locking my own door, collapsing against it, breath tearing through my lungs in ragged sobs. My mind fractured, struggling to reconcile the quaint bungalow next door with the abomination it concealed. Such things weren't real. They belonged to celluloid nightmares, to the shadowed corners of folklore. Yet the phantom glow of those eyes, the memory of those teeth, they were seared onto my retinas. With fingers that refused to steady, I dialed the police, the words tumbling out in a near incoherent stream, acutely aware of how utterly mad I must sound. Skeptical, but professional, they promised a patrol car. Waiting, shivering in the sudden cold of my own home, a dreadful thought surfaced. Eleanor. What if she returned early? What if that thing was still loose in her house? I had to warn her. Her number, scribbled on a notepad by my phone. I punched it in, praying. Her voice, when it came, was jarringly cheerful. Hello. A lifeline in a maelstrom. Eleanor, I gasped, voice cracking. Are you still away? Why, yes, dear, she replied, a note of faint surprise. Is everything all right? You sound rather distressed. How to phrase the unphraseable. There's... Eleanor, is something in your house. Something dangerous. Please don't come back yet. I've called the police." A beat of silence stretched across the line, heavy and profound. When Eleanor spoke again, the grandmotherly warmth had evaporated, leaving behind something chillingly flat, devoid of emotion. "Oh dear," she said, her tone like chipped porcelain. "You weren't meant to discover it quite like this." Ice water seemed to flood my veins. "Discover what? What do you mean?" "That creature you encountered," she stated matter-of-factly. "That's my Silas, my son. He has particular needs. I was certain I'd secure the basement properly before leaving." Bile rose in my throat. "Your son, Eleanor. That thing wasn't human." A sigh, heavy and laden with years of weary resignation, whispered through the phone. "No," she conceded. "I suppose he isn't. Not entirely. Not for a long time. There was an incident, you understand, years ago. Silas always dabbled. The arcane, forbidden texts. An experiment went awry. Terribly awry. My world tilted. This couldn't be real. But keeping him locked down there, why didn't you seek help?" Eleanor laughed, a short, brittle sound utterly devoid of humor. "What help is there for this? Who could possibly understand? Keeping him contained here, it was the only way. I've managed somehow, but it grows more difficult. I'm not as young as I was. That's why I asked you, dear. I hoped perhaps you might prove capable." The implication struck me with the force of a physical blow. The house sitting, the extended visits away. A test, a gradual grooming, positioning me to inherit her monstrous burden. Before the horror could fully coalesce into words, distant sirens sliced through the night. "The police. They're here," I stammered. "I have to go." "No!" Eleanor's voice sharpened, laced with sudden, raw panic. "Don't let them find him. They won't understand. Promise me you'll protect Silas. Please!" I ended the call, the phone slipping from my trembling grasp. Outside, flashing strobes of red and blue painted chaotic patterns across neighboring houses. Uniformed figures approached Eleanor's bungalow, weapons drawn, moving with taut caution. A moment of loaded silence. Then that blood-curdling shriek tore through the night once more. Shouts erupted. The sharp crack of gunfire. More shrieks, bestial and agonizing. I crumpled to my living room floor, hands clamped over my ears, trying futilely to block out the symphony of violence next door. My quiet, predictable street had become a slaughterhouse. How? Eventually, an unnerving quiet descended. Peeking through the blinds revealed Eleanor's house swathed in yellow tape. A grim quarantine. Ambulances waited, their interiors briefly illuminated as attendants loaded shrouded forms. Later, a detective, face etched with exhaustion and grim discovery, took my statement. I recounted everything: the arrangement, the disarray, the basement, the creature, the chilling phone call. He listened intently, his pen scratching occasionally across a notepad. "You're exceptionally lucky," he stated flatly when I finished, his eyes holding no warmth. "We lost 3 officers in there. Whatever that thing is, it's inhumanly strong. Vicious. A knot formed in my throat. Did you stop it?" I whispered, unsure if I truly wanted the answer. The detective's expression darkened further. Unclear. Significant blood loss, signs of injury, but no body recovered. It may have fled into the woods bordering the properties. We have teams searching. Sleep became an impossibility. Lying rigid in bed, darkness amplifying every creak of my own house, I replayed the night's horrors. Silas. What existence had that been, chained in darkness beneath the lavender and lace? What manner of maternal love festers into such monstrous denial? And me. How perilously close had I skirted the edge of that abyss, nearly drawn into Eleanor's suffocating secret, destined perhaps to become the next keeper of the beast. The following weeks dissolved into a disorienting haze of official inquiries, unwanted local media attention, and nights punctuated by waking terrors. Eleanor Vance, upon her return, was arrested, facing charges that barely encompassed the nightmare she'd curated. Through it all, she maintained she was merely a mother protecting her child. Silas himself vanished without a trace. Sometimes when the wind is still and the moon is hidden, I fancy I hear something howl, far off in the wooded darkness beyond the manicured lawns. Each time the deadbolts are checked, the curtains drawn tight. The illusion of suburban tranquility has been irrevocably shattered. The quaint house next door, the kindly old woman with her cat and cookies, they masked a horror that defied imagination. Now, every familiar street, every drawn curtain feels suspect. What other secrets fester behind ordinary doors? What other monsters, human or otherwise, wait patiently just beyond the light? One thing is absolute. I will never, ever house it again. A brittle fracture underfoot, sharp against the wind's low sigh through the pines. Perhaps only a foraging creature, a nocturnal scavenger. But the second crack, closer, followed by the unmistakable cadence of burdened breathing and whispers that snagged on the night air, coiled ice around my spine. Our sanctuary in these woods was breached, and the intruders, cloaked by the dense dark, harbored intentions far removed from shared warmth around a dying fire. This was meant to be an untethering, a brief absconding from the city's relentless hum. Just Elias, that's me, and Alara, alongside our companions Finn and Chloe. We'd sought the deep quiet of the mountains, a haven discovered on some dimly lit corner of the internet, a cabin described as remote, elemental, blessedly distant from the well-trodden paths, an idol, we convinced ourselves, perfect for shedding the weight of the world. The ascent itself had been buoyant with laughter, the car windows framing vistas of escalating wildness. Our final tether to civilization was a dusty general store in a town clinging precariously to the last paved road. Stocking up on essentials, we exchanged pleasantries with the proprietor, Silas, a man whose face was a roadmap of weathered seasons. When our destination was mentioned, a peculiar stillness claimed his features. Not many venture that high now, he murmured, his gaze distant, troubled. Not since... well, best be watchful is all. We dismissed his caution as the quaint folklore of isolated places, a folly we'd come to lament bitterly. The cabin materialized from the trees exactly as pictured. 2 cozy bedrooms embraced by a clearing, dwarfed by sentinel pines. Our first day dissolved in exploration, tracing sun-dappled trails, inhaling the fragrance of untouched earth. As twilight bled into night, we circled the fire pit, charring marshmallows, trading tales designed to thrill and chill. It was was only as the second evening deepened, the stars like scattered frost overhead, that the atmosphere began to sour. I felt it first, an invisible pressure, the primal certainty of being observed. It raised the fine hairs along my arms, a chill independent of the mountain air. I fought it down, blaming Finn's lurid ghost stories, an overstimulated imagination. Yet, the sensation persisted. Unseen eyes fixed upon us from the impenetrable blackness, rimming our fragile bubble of light. Anyone else, I began, striving for nonchalance. Get the feeling like we're not quite alone out here. Alara managed to laugh, but it rang hollow, brittle. Finn's spooky tales getting under your skin too, Elias. Yet her gaze flickered involuntarily towards the tree line, her shoulders betraying a tension that mirrored my own. She sensed it too. Finn, ever the performer, lurched to his feet, thrusting out his chest in mock defiance. All right, show yourself, whatever skulking beastie you are. His voice, intended to boom, seemed absorbed by the vast silence, leaving only the fire's crackle and a far-off owl's lament in reply. A taut moment stretched, every breath held captive. Then Chloe cried out, a sharp, terrified sound. We spun, following her trembling finger. There, hovering at the very edge of the firelight's reach, stood a presence. Tall, unnervingly immobile, its shape defined more by the darkness it displaced than by any discernible feature. For a suspended heartbeat, stillness reigned. Then, with fluid grace, the figure pivoted and dissolved back into the forest's Stygian depths. Chaos erupted. Chloe was weeping, clutching Finn's arm. Alara's fingers dug into my bicep, a painful anchor. What in God's name was that? Finn's voice cracked, his bravado shattered. No idea, I whispered, my throat dry as dust. But we need to be inside, right now. We scrambled to smother the flames, the dying embers hissing like panicked breaths, then bolted for the cabin, the heavy lock clicking shut with unnerving finality. Sleep became an impossibility. We huddled together in the main room, nerves jangling at every groan of the old timbers, every sibilant rush of wind against the eaves. Perhaps just a hiker, Alara offered weakly, her voice thin. Lost, maybe, drawn by the fire. Then why the silence? Chloe countered, her fear sharpening her tone. Why just stand there? The question hung unanswered in the suffocating air. With the hesitant arrival of dawn, painting the sky in bruised purples and tentative golds, a sliver of rationality returned. Daylight has a way of diminishing nocturnal terrors. We began to persuade ourselves of overreaction, minds tricked by exhaustion and suggestion. The illusion shattered when Finn, venturing out for firewood, stumbled back through the door, his face bleached of color. "The car," he choked out. "Someone. They slashed the tires." We rushed outside. It was true. All 4 tires gaped open, brutal incisions marring the rubber. Not random mischief. This was calculated, deliberate, trapping us. "We have to leave," Alara stated, her voice trembling but firm. "Call someone." My phone, however, displayed only mocking emptiness. No service. The others confirmed the same digital isolation. "Right," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Okay, we can manage. That store, Silas's place. It's what, 10 miles down the mountain. We can hike it." The prospect of the long trek held no appeal, etched plainly on their faces, but it was the only path forward. We gathered minimal supplies, the early sun offering little warmth against against the persistent chill of fear, and began our descent. An hour into the strained silence of our march, it came. The distinct snap of a twig somewhere behind us on the trail. We froze in unison, turning with excruciating slowness. Nothing but the dense tapestry of trees and undergrowth met our eyes. Yet, I could have sworn I glimpsed movement, a fleeting darkness withdrawing behind a thick trunk. Faster, I urged, my voice low, urgent. We quickened our pace, conversation abandoned, every faculty strained to catch the slightest sound of pursuit. The forest, so enchanting mere hours ago, now felt suffocating, its beauty warped into a labyrinth of potential menace. It was Alari who noticed it first, a structure half swallowed by encroaching foliage just off the path. Not our rented cabin. This one was older, weathered, leaning into its own decay. But it represented shelter, a concept that suddenly held profound significance. We approached with wary steps. The door hung slightly ajar, groaning a mournful rhythm in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust and neglect, years of stillness palpable. "Hello?" My voice echoed strangely in the gloom. "Anyone home?" Only silence responded. We crossed the threshold, our boots disturbing ancient dust motes dancing in the faint light, filtering through grimy panes. Furniture draped in spectral white sheets stood like patient ghosts. Cobwebs formed intricate, decaying lace in every corner. "Look at this," Ben breathed, pointing to a faded photograph tacked to the wall. "Isn't that Silas from the store?" We gathered close. The image showed several men posed before this very cabin, rifles held casually, smiles fixed. Silas was there, undeniably him, though decades younger. And beside him, "Oh dear God," Chloe whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The figure standing slightly apart at the end of the line didn't quite belong. Taller than the others, its features strangely smeared, as if recoiling from the camera's flash. Yet the silhouette, unnaturally elongated, thin, was chillingly familiar. A floorboard creaked directly behind us. We whirled as one. Silas stood framed in the doorway, no longer the folksy shopkeeper, but a grim sentinel, a heavy shotgun held loosely in his hands. "You folks shouldn't have come here," he stated, his voice heavy with a weary gravity. "This ground ain't safe." A beat of stunned silence passed before the questions flooded out. Who was stalking us? What did the photograph mean? What nightmare had we stumbled into? Silas let out a long sigh, the years settling visibly upon him. "It's a story," he said, his eyes clouded with old sorrows, and not one you'll take comfort from. He spoke then of the valley's shadowed history, of a sect that had festered in these woods generations ago, their devotion bent towards something ancient and malevolent, their rituals demanding the blood of outsiders. He recounted how the townsfolk, pushed beyond endurance, had finally risen up, purging the forest with fire and steel, hunting down the cultists. But their leader, Silas continued, his gaze fixed on some distant horror. He was altered, less than human by the end, if he ever truly was. We couldn't destroy him, try as we might. So we bound him here, tied him to these woods with old blood and older words. He nodded towards the photograph. That was taken the day after. We thought the nightmare finished. But every so often, strangers find their way up here, ignorant of the past, and he senses them, hunts them, feeds on their fear, their We absorbed his words in horrified disbelief. It sounded like madness, a fever dream. Yet, after the figure by the fire, the slashed tires, the chilling photograph, could we afford to dismiss it? What do we do now? I asked, my voice raspy. Silas's expression hardened into resolve. We get you clear of his reach. Then, we make certain this path stays closed for good. The journey that followed remains etched in my memory as pure, distilled terror. Every rustle of leaves became a footfall, every shadow a lurking shape. Silas moved ahead, shotgun held ready, his eyes constantly probing the dense woods flanking our path. We were agonizingly close to the main road when a sound tore through the trees. A sound utterly alien, belonging neither to beast nor man. A protracted howl, vibrating with incandescent rage, primal hunger, and an ancient, chilling wrongness. "Run!" Silas roared, the command cracking like his shotgun. We plunged into a frantic, desperate sprint. Branches lashed our faces, unseen roots clawed at our ankles. Behind us, I heard it. A heavy, impossibly fast crashing through the undergrowth, gaining ground. We burst from the tree line onto the gravel road, just as the headlights of a truck swept around the curve. Silas discharged his shotgun into the air, a deafening blast. The truck screeched to a halt in a spray of gravel. "Get in," he yelled, shoving us towards the truck bed. "Go, now!" We tumbled in as the vehicle lurched forward, tires spitting stones. I risked one last look back towards the forest's edge, and there it stood, tall, impossibly gaunt, its arms seeming too long for its body, its face a vortex of indistinct features. It lifted one skeletal hand, a gesture that could have been a wave or a curse. Then the truck rounded another bend, and the woods reclaimed their secret. We never returned. Silas, true to his word, ensured the rental listing vanished. The access road became impassable. He would stand guard, he'd said, ensuring no others unwittingly wandered into that entity's domain. Yet sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, that unearthly howl echoes in my dreams. I wake drenched in cold sweat, the oppressive presence of those woods, the memory of that figure, starkly vivid, and a cold dread settles in my gut. Is it still there, pacing the borders of its prison, waiting? What happens when Silas is gone? Who will keep the path closed then? It's a question I pray I live long enough never to see answered.